Distracted. Okay, Shavua Tov, everyone. It is Sunday, sometime almost Rosh Chodesh Nisan. One night till Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And today's daf in Masechet Bava Metzia is daf Lamed Tet. And I recorded Lamed Chet. We're recording Lamed Tet, me and Rosa. But we got to
because you're recording
an important Braita. Right. So the Braita, which we're going to read again because we might have some time before people join, is on Lamed Chet Amabet. And it is 10 lines from the bottom. The Tanya. We read this already, we'll read it again. Hayored the Nechsei Shavui. You got it? Right there. The Tanya. Right there.
Thanks.
A person who goes down to a Nechsei Shavui, a person is a captive, and someone else, we'll see it's probably a relative, someone else goes and starts working their field. Says the Braita, you don't stop the person, you let them work the field, and you let them keep and use what they gain in the field. And not only that, if a person hears, oh, the captive was freed, he's coming home, and you go quickly, and you're like, I worked hard on this field, I planted all these tomatoes, and you pick your tomatoes and you take them, by being quick about it, you benefited because, in fact, you're allowed to keep it. And hello, Miriam. Rosa and I are catching up. And these are Nichsei Shvuyim. We are 8 lines in the bottom of Lamed Chet Amabet. If a person's relative, their father, their brother, someone who gives them a Yerusha, goes to a foreign country, Vishamu b'hem shemit, and you hear that they were killed. That is one case. That's the first case. Yored the Nichsei Shavui. We are 7 lines from the bottom. Hayored Nichsei Nitushim. The second case of the Braita is Nitushim. Then, if a person, we'll see what Nitushim is in a second, Motzi Nato Miyado. Then, if a person goes down and says, I'm going to work the field of this person who's missing, you say, get out of there. Ve'elohein Nichsei Nitushim. What are Nitushim? They went away. Now we're going to see that probably this means, and they were captured. Something is wrong, but we haven't heard that they died. So they are presumably or maybe alive. So there, the Tanakama says, don't touch their stuff. And Rama Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, I disagree. Shamati shanitushim gishvuyim. That in fact, even if they're natush, meaning they're missing, they're the same as shvuyim, which in this case was, we heard that they were killed. Tosas points out if they for sure were killed, and they're not part of the game anymore, right? Then they're morishim. So it means we have a rumor that they were killed. But here they weren't even rumored to be killed. Says Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, it doesn't matter. Nitushim are kishvuyim. So that's the middle case. So there's those who we heard they died, those who we didn't know if they died. And the third case is Hayored the Nechsei Ritushim. Ritushim, which means those who abandon their property. Then, if someone abandons their property and runs away, and a relative says, I want to go take care of it, the Beit Din says, get out of there. You can't touch their field. That's the case. Right? They were here and they ran away. We don't know where they went, but they went willingly. There's no rumor that they were captured. Says the Gemara, just explain the language first of all. Well, anyways, just to point out, sorry, before I read the last line, the idea is that if a person left and didn't leave instructions, they probably didn't want anyone to touch their field, right? Because they knew they were leaving, and they would have said, can you please go watch my field or take care of my field? I'm going away for 2 years, right? So the fact that they did it means that they don't want anyone to watch their field. The only case we're not sure about is where they were captive or something bad happened to them, and we have to understand what's in their best interest. And that's where there's a machloket Tanaim, which yesterday we said was a machloket Rav and Shmuel. There's a little bit of question about why Rav and Shmuel would have a machloket about what a machloket Tanaim is, but that is right. Why wouldn't they say that? Tosas goes through it here. So, but either way, that is the case where Rav and Shmuel disagree about whether you are Moridin Karov, the Nichsei Shavui, whether you put a relative in to work the field of a captive. It says on the bottom line now, what's the source of these words? Nitushim for those who are captive and Ritushim for those who leave willingly. It says on the top of Lametet Amud Aleph, Nitushim means people who are Bal Karcha, who are forced not to come back, right? De Bal Karche. It's against their will. Dichtiv, as the pasuk says, Hashvi'it, the 7th year, Tishmetenu unitashta. You have to leave the land fallow, but you don't have a choice about that. Afkata de Malka, right? It's the king or God says that you have to leave it behind. But ritushim is mida'atan. Ritushim means people who leave willingly. The chtiv, as it says in the pasuk in Hosea, aim al banim rutasha. A mother with her children will run away, will flee. Rashi goes through a whole explanation, but how you know this is referring to people leaving willingly ahead of an army, meaning they're not leaving because they want to leave, but they see that the army is coming and they choose to leave. So then you have time to give instructions, basically. Tana. Now the Braita concluded the fourth line now of Lametet Amud Aleph and said, "V'kulan." In all these cases, the person who goes down to work the field, shamin lahem ka'aris. This person went down to work the field. There's a huge machloket here, Rashi and Tosfot. Rashi makes very, I think, less. I shouldn't say no sense, but less sense than Tosfot. But obviously, I don't mean Rashi has Rashi's reasons. But the person who went down and worked the field, they get property, they get paid like an aris. So Rashi makes it sound like, let's say the person left the field for 10 years, and this relative went down and worked the field, and every year harvested, 10,000 pounds of potatoes. They get paid like an aris, like a sharecropper, who gets, say, half or third, whatever the norm is in that neighborhood, okay? And the rest you put in a bank and, and you give back to the person when he returns. And if he never returns because he dies, then obviously this Yoresh gets everything. Tosfos says, and Tosfos makes, as I said, a lot more sense from the sugya, that that's not what it means. What it means is that the person who goes and works the field keeps everything. If you work the field and make a lot of potatoes, you keep all the potatoes. But if in the 10th year the person returns and there's a field full of potatoes, then what do you do about that year? I mean, what do you do about the year in which the owner returns and this guy put in all this effort? Do you say, sorry, I'm home, thanks a lot? Then you get paid like an aris. Now it was interesting yesterday in one of the questions, but that's the machlok and Rashi and Tosfot about whether it's the last year or the whole time. But you assess them like a sharecropper. Now says ahai. What is this referring to? Ilema, meaning which case, right? We had three cases. Shvuyim, where you heard they died. Nitushim, where they are captive, but we don't know if they're alive or dead. And Ritushim, where they just ran away, right? So which case are you referring to that if the relative goes down and works the field, they get paid like a sharecropper? Ilema ashvuyim, if you're referring to the first case where we heard that they died, we said that even if they heard that he's coming back, the person who went down to the field can just harvest the whole field and keep it, right? Hashta zariz b'niskar, we said you can rush and collect it all and keep it all because you went down with permission. So obviously you can get paid like a sharecropper, right? You could have taken the whole thing, right? Hashta zariz b'niskar havi mai da'ashvich mibai. Certainly what you made the field better, you can keep. Or keep some of. Ella aritushim. So it must be referring to the case of Ritushim where the person went in midat. But there we said you're not even allowed to go into the field. Ella anitushim must be referring to the middle case, where the person is gone against their will. We don't know what they would want, right? So now the man. Ilema the Rabbanan, the Tanakama said, Amri miyado, that we don't let a relative go work the field. So if we don't let you go, but you go against our will and you're not going to get paid for that. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said that you actually do send a relative down to work the field. But then he said, Ha'amar, his words were, Shamati, I heard, Chanit Tushim Kishvuyim, that you pay the person who goes down from the Tushim like the Shvuyim. Now, Shvuyim, you get to keep everything. Says Gemara, no, what he means is Kishvuyim, below Kishvuyim, that it's like the Shvuyim, but it's not identical to the Shvuyim, right? Meaning, Kishvuyim, the relative who goes down to work the field is like a relative in a case of shvuyim, the ein motziano tamiyado. You don't take it away from him. You allow him to keep working the field. But lo kishvuyim, but it's not exactly like shvuyim. Dilo hatam, there, if you're zariz v'niskar, the more you take, the more you get, right? If you're zariz, you can keep everything because you're allowed to go because the person is presumably dead. But ilo hacha, but here we shaimina like aris, we treat you like a sharecropper and you get to keep a percentage of the investment, but you don't get to keep everything. Ask the Gemara, okay, so what you're concluding now is that according to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, in a case of what we call here today, what we're calling Netushim, yesterday we actually called it Shavoi, but it's the same case, meaning someone is captive, they're not coming back, not by choice, because they are captive. We don't know if they're alive or dead. We haven't heard that they died. Then a relative, according to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, and according to Shmuel yesterday, is assigned to go work the field, okay? And they get paid like an aris. Why is this different than the Mishnah? The Mishnah in Ketubot, which talks about something very similar, which is not quite the same. A case where a man marries a woman, Okay. And one of the issues of marrying, one of the not issues, one of the realities of marrying a woman is that if she brings property in, it's called nichsei malug, right? It's her property. When he dies or she gets divorced, she gets it back with her, but he eats the payroll the whole time that they're married. So let's say she comes in with this gorgeous field, right? So this husband, as we always love to say, is madly in love and he thinks he's going to be married to her for 50 years. So he invests in a multi-million-dollar watering system and things. And of course, 3 months later, they're divorced, right? So the Mishnah says it's none. Hamotzi hotzaot an ishto, a person who invests money on the property of his wife that she's going to keep. Let's say he's hotzi harbe v'chal kima. He invests a tremendous amount and he only gets a little bit out of it. Kima means a tiny bit, right? Or the opposite could happen, right? They can get married and it's an apple orchard,
Yeah.
full of apples, and he takes all the apples, and by the next winter, they're not married anymore, right? So he's then achal harbe, he ate a ton, where am I? Hotzi harbe v'achal kima, or kima, he put in a little bit, v'achal harbe, and he ate a lot. Says the Mishnah, you don't go, and he cannot go to his ex-wife in this case and say, I want you to pay me back for my investment. And she can't go to him and say, I want you to pay me back for what you took from the field. Masha hotzi, right? What he invested, and masha achal, achal. So why don't we say the same thing here? This is what Tosis really asks on Rashi from, right? That look, if the guy hadn't come back, you get to keep what's in the field. So now the guy came back and say, okay, it's over, party's over, right? You give the field back, and what you invested. What you ate. It's over. Says where no, because they are both two knowledgeable people who get married. Halo dami elaha. It's similar to the following case in the. I don't know if you have it in yours over here, but in the Gimel, it's one of them, and mine has it on the side. The Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Chisda, this is not a Braita, this is a statement of Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Chisda in, I think, Ketubot. Hamotzi hotzaot al nichsei ishto tana. This is similar to a case where, let's say, a person marries, remember the whole case we discussed in Kiddushin and elsewhere, where a minor gets married, right? So a minor can be married off by her father in Minat Torah. But if her father's dead or her father already married her off, then she can be married by her mother and brothers or her father a second time, midrabanan. And if a girl is married midrabanan, she has the option of doing mi'un. Mi'un means she can just get up. Remember, we discussed when she could do it and say, I don't want to be married anymore. She doesn't even need to get. She just annuls the marriage. So now, obviously, you have a whole nother problem because she comes into the marriage with a field. Her husband's never going to invest in that field because any day she can stand up and say, I'm done. Right? So there, says Rav Yehuda Rav Chisda, Hamotzi hotzot anechsei ishto ketana. If you invest in a field for your wife who's a ketana, then it's kimotzi anechsei acher dami. It's like our case. It's like investing in somebody else's property, meaning, let's say a person's relative is captive. It's like that case. Alma, what you see is since a person will not rely on the fact that they're going to get anything out of this, because they know that either the person could come back anytime or the girl can annul the marriage at any time. So since he has no control over the situation, he won't do anything for the field. And therefore, we're worried he's not going to invest. So Takina le Rabbanan said, okay, you get to keep at least like a sharecropper, right? So that the field doesn't lay fallow, because otherwise no one will ever invest in the field. So Achanami Takina le Rabbanan. Here too, the Rabbanan said, look, this person's unknown where they are. They could return at any moment. They might not. Maybe it's unlikely, but it's possible. So no one's going to put effort into this field if they're not going to get anything out of it. And therefore, they made a takana that in this case, similar to the case of a wife who's a ketana, that in fact, the person who works on the field, like the husband in that case, gets to keep some percentage of the crops. Continues the Braita, the Kulan, in all of these cases, we assign it like an aris, like a sharecropper. This is what I mean, all of these cases. You just said it's referring to the single case of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel in the case of Nitushim. So what do you mean all of these cases? Says the Gemara, V'kulan latu yemai. What are you including with the word V'kulan? That is latu yadam Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. In fact, that's including the statement of Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel that said Shavui Shenishba. Okay, let's say you have a captive who's captured. Obviously, that's how the Gemara often talks, right? Etc.
A thief who stole.
A thief who stole, exactly. So you have a Shavuot Nishba. Says Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. This is what Shmuel said yesterday. Moridin karov the nechasav. So you assign a relative, or a relative's allowed. We'll debate allowed, or you assign it a relative can go down and work their property. Yatsa lidat, if the person said, I'm leaving, I'm circling the world, I'm going on a 3-year yacht cruise, right, to find the new world, and they didn't assign someone to go work in their field, then that's their choice. Ein moridin karov lechasav. Then you don't, after they leave, say, oh boy, he would have wanted us to work. He would have told you if he wanted you to. But that's what Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel. But Rav Nachman Didei Amar, and this is what we added with the word Vikulan, Rav Nachman himself added a case of Boreach, a person who's running away, a person who's fleeing, Harehu Kishavui. Even though he's not captured, because he's being forced to leave, he is like a captive. Now says, what do you mean he's running? Boreach Machmatmai. Why is this person running out of town? Ilema Machmat Karga, because they assigned, remember, Karga was one of the taxes, right? So they would, there was like a head tax. So you'd go to a town, if there were 50 able-bodied people in the town, they would say this town is to give $50,000. And remember, it was a collective thing, right? So the whole town had to give it. It was responsibility on everybody based on the number of people.
Very socialist.
That is how it used to be, right? It's, for a long time, that's how it was, right? And obviously the richer people would end up giving more and they would assign numbers. But so this guy wants to run away, so he's not included in the cargo, right? Well, it says, but that Hainu Ladat, but he knows that the tax collectors are coming. So why doesn't he get his affairs in order? Go around to his nephews and cousins and say, I want one of you to watch my field and I'm running away. Ella Borech Machmat Martin. It must be a case where he ran away because he killed somebody. And Rashi says that in those days, the authorities used to kill people for killing other people.
Why are you so surprised?
Rashi makes it sound a little surprising. Rashi says, and the Parsaim, the Persians, would kill you for killing someone. So
that's such a plot twist. I was not expecting.
Rashi says the word margin is murder in Persian. I don't know if anyone here speaks Persian, but that's what.
Yeah, no.
Much that Rashi spoke Persian.
I should say not yet.
I'm not sure how Rashi spoke Persian, but Rashi actually quotes it from the Shilto.
He did?
Of Haigon. How would Rashi speak Persian? There's no way Rashi spoke Persian, but he quotes it from Haigon. I guess from Haigon did speak Persian, right? Because he was in Bavel. The Gonim were in Bavel. So
They spoke Persian in Bava?
yeah, they speak Persian.
What else do they speak in
Bava?
Bava?
They spoke, I don't know, Aramaic maybe, but anyways.
Maybe Rashi?
No, Rashi quotes Rav Haigon. Rav Haigon, I think, was in Bavel. He was in
Right. Okay, no, because Rashi, I was going to say, probably also spoke German because he learned in Germany.
Interesting. The old Saxon languages.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I know. Okay. Anyway, so in that case, where he's running away because he murdered someone, there you don't have a lot of time to get your affairs in order, right? So he ran home and he fled town, and so that says Rav Yudah says Rav Nachman, that is similar to someone who was captured. Because basically they had to leave against their will. They didn't have time to get their affairs in order. And therefore you do what's in their best interest, which is you send a relative to work on the field. I'm Rav Yudar Shmuel. Says Rav Yudar Shmuel, let me just make a big point to you. Everything we've been discussing for the last 2 days is referring to a field that is not yet worked. A person runs away and their field is empty. Okay, it needs work. Who's going to go work the field? So you're going to have a hard time, we'll see in a second, finding someone to go work that field because it's not easy to get someone to do that. So you assign a relative, and the purpose of a relative is to remember that they might inherit the field, because if the person's dead, right, then they get to keep it. So they're incentivized to invest in this field. But says Rav Yehuda or Shmuel, if the guy ran away and actually, or woman in this case, ran away and left a field that was full of perot, it was already worked. It was the end of the season, right? So Shavoi Shenishba, you get a captive who's captured, and they leave a field of grain that's standing ready to be harvested. Or anavim livtzar, these are all the same verb, right, for different species. Grapes that are going to be harvested, or tamarim ligdor, or zaitim limsok, right? In Hebrew, there's a different verb for each, not each one, but many of these. Then in those cases, we don't assign a relative. Beitin yordin lechasav. Beit Din goes down to his property, umamidin aputropis, and you assign some workers who are, under the authority of Beit Din, and kotera botzera godera moses. They do all the harvesting, and they put that and they sell it and they put the money in escrow, right? They must have to pay the workers, but they pay the workers, they keep the money in escrow. And then once the field is empty, then you go to the family and say, okay, it's time for you guys to go and invest in the field. Then you go down and you send the family in, because otherwise no one's going to go in. Says, why is no one going to go in? If you found an apotropos to harvest the field and give him whatever money, look him apotropa la'olam, right? Why don't you set up a professional thing? Why are you sending family? It's always not a good idea to rely on family, right? Get a professional assistant. Says the Gemara, a very important principle, apotrapa lidiknani lo mukminan. For adults, diknani means adults, we don't set up apotropas. We only do it for minors. Rashi says the reason is that it's really hard to find people who are willing to work somebody else's field, right? It's not like do your own field if you're competent. Yeah. So for orphans, it's there's a lot of people who give of themselves, as you can imagine, for social system so that they can provide for people who need someone to provide for them. But it's a lot harder to find an apotropos to do it for an adult. And so therefore, in that case, you have to find a relative, basically. But relatives are not better. You'd rather have a professional than a relative, right? So if you can get a professional, get a professional. But in most cases, you need to find a relative.
You're assuming that they have relatives.
You're assuming they have relatives. And also what I just said to you is there's a lot of machlokim amongst the Rishonim. What if you do have professionals?
Yeah.
Right? So Rashi makes it sound like you can't find them. What if you could find them? So there are those Rishonim who say that in general, they're not as good, right? That people who are not doing their own work, they're working for someone. There must be a reason, right? Why aren't you can't keep a job, right? Why are you doing temporary work, basically? That's the honest truth. I forgot who it was exactly. One of Rishonim says something like that. So it's not, it's not the ideal situation, but it's certainly something that you could do short term. Or for orphans, we actually do it because there's much more sensitivity and people are willing to sacrifice themselves for that. Amar Rafuna. Now says Rafuna, a very interesting point. We're 7 lines from the bottom, 8 lines. Ein moridin katan l'nechsei shavui. Right? Let's say somebody is captured and the only relative is a 10-year-old. You can't send that child down because they don't know what they're doing. So you never send a child to cover. And so Beit Din would then assign somebody else, or you would wait and no one would do it. And lo karov l'nechsei katan. But interestingly, and we'll see this more in detail, if a katan either is captive, so no one, say katan's father died and he's got this field, so usually he would assign an apotropos or whatever, but let's say he's captive or he's not even captive, but he needs help working the field. You never assign a relative to help a katan, as we're going to see. And the reason the Gemara is going to say, it's very interesting, is that, after a while, what ends up happening is that the relative starts thinking it's their own field. Right. So
they take advantage. Yeah.
Take advantage. Oh, yeah, my father, your father, blah, blah, whatever it is, it gets very dicey. You want an outsider to be there with the katan. Otherwise, they'll take away ownership. And the katan is not sophisticated enough or knowledgeable enough to say, wait a second, this person's stealing this out from under me. It happens all the time, right? Not all the time, but it used to happen, right? So you never send a relative to a katan. And furthermore, look, karov machmat karov l'nechsei katan. You shouldn't send a relative of a relative. What does that refer to? We'll see in a second. You don't assign a katan, the first halacha, to the property of a captive because dilma mafselu. He's a katan. He's going to make terrible business decisions and decide to plant entirely asparagus, right? And it's going to ruin the whole field and ruin everything. And lo karov machmat karov l'nechsei katan. What does karov machmat karov mean? It means a brother, achini ima, right? A brother from a mother going to a field of a brother of a father, meaning there's 3 brothers. Reuven and Shimon share a father. Shimon and Levi share a mother, but Reuven and Levi are not related, right? Because they don't have the same father or the same mother. So there, you're not supposed to, let's say, Reuven and Shimon again share the same father. Shimon and Levi share the same mother, and Reuven is missing, or Reuven needs help. He's a katan. So Shimon for sure can't go down. He's a brother, but you can't even send Levi down because even though he's not a brother, they might say, oh, this field came to you from your mother, not from your father, and I'm related. So, it could make trouble, basically. So you don't do that. And the middle case, which we get to last, is now in parentheses, below karov l'nechsei katan. You never assign a relative to watch over the property of a minor. Kivan, why? Because since the minor is not going to say, what's this person doing in my field? He's my uncle. He's my friend, whatever, he's my cousin. He belongs here. So therefore, atilach zukibe, that relative is going to come say, I live here. It's mine. I have a chazakah, right? So normally, if someone comes and squats in your house, right, you have to get up and make an announcement and say, this person is taking advantage. They're squatting in my house. If you don't say anything for 3 years, let's say, we'll see this all in Bava Batra, then that person can stay. It's a chazakah, right? But it's your relative. So you're not making announcements about your relative, and they're going to come 5 years from now and say, what do you mean it's his field? This was my field all along. I'm just a nice cousin. I let him stay because he was an orphan, etc. Amar Rava. Now says Rava, Shema Mi'amid Rafuna. You see from Rafuna that ein machzikin b'nechsei katan. That an outsider can never get a chazakah b'nechsei katan from the fact that you're allowed to let a stranger go and take care of this field of the katan. Why aren't you worried that 3 years from now the stranger is going to get up and say, it's my field. He sold it to me. I've been living here for 3 years. No one ever stopped me. Clearly, that's not enough, right? So a chazakah, which normally exists, does not exist with the katan. So we're not worried that a person is going to get up and say, I own this field. I bought it from the katan. So I feel
You mean they didn't have problems with squatters back then?
correct, exactly. Even when he grew up. Below Amr says Rav, this is Rav, who's talking?
Oh my gosh, he just
Says Rava, below Amran, or this might be the Gemara, but let's say it's Rava. Below Amran, we only said that you can't send a relative to a minor, top line, Rosa, ela ba'achi da'aba. It's only if it's a brother from the father, because then they inherit together. Ela achi da'ima, if it's a brother from the mother, let them, but then you don't have to worry about it, because they don't get the same inheritance. Achi da'aba nami l'amran, and by a brother from the father, they also only said it's a problem. Ela barata, if you're referring to like property out in the field where there's no one living there, so it's really unclear who owns it. Ela bibati, but if it's in the house, let them ba, because everybody's going to remember, oh, what do you mean? This orphan's father lived in the house, and there'll be a chazak, and everyone will know. And even barata, even when you're talking about land, nami lo amr, they only said it's a problem, ela de lo avid itita. You didn't do a document, right? Which is what Lily asked at dinner tonight. Why don't you put a document for all these things? But if you made a formal document, then people know about this, that this person died and they left the field to their son, and we don't have to worry about all of that. Says but all that is misplaced, what's it called? Misplaced trust in humanity. Velohi. None of that is true. Don't trust anybody. It doesn't matter if it's a brother from the father or the mother. Loshna arata, doesn't matter if it's a field out, way out, loshna bati, or it's in the house. Loshna avid itida, loshna lo avid itida, doesn't matter if you make a contract or don't make a contract. Lo machtinan, don't let a relative get their claws on their orphan. They're going to make trouble. There's potential for them to, poison everything, change the narrative. And don't let family gather.
I feel like this is so contradictory because in so many other places in the Gemara, you make the law as if everyone's following the law, and here you're making the law as if not everyone's
I mean, this is a common, but the difference is that people, by relatives, happens all the time, right? People forget who owns, who left it, where it came from. And especially when you have orphans, we're always terrified that they don't have the knowledge, right? We generally assume that when you have adults involved, that if you see a problem, you're going to speak up, you're going to go and do something. But we can't assume that with children who are minors. So that's where we always make protections to assume the worst from society. Who's Safta? Now, we have two cases that the rest of today's daf. It's very fascinating cases that will elucidate whether you paid attention in daf today, Rosa. So the first case is a Safta. There's a grandma, okay? It's not going to end well for the grandma, but this is a grandma. The Havei Tlat Banta. She has 3 daughters, okay? And we're going to see that one of her daughters has a son. Okay. And she went on a trip, and unfortunately, she was hijacked. Ishtabatai ihi v'chadabarta. The grandma and one of her daughters, daughter A, were captured, okay, by pirates. And idich tartibarta, of the other 2 daughters who are alive, worried sick about their mother, shchiva chadaminai, one of them died. V'shafkia yunuka, she left a minor child, a son, who's a minor. So now we have a missing grandma, a missing aunt, one living daughter who's standing here, and one grandson from a different daughter. Okay. So, and the problem, of course, is.
Why are you saying missing? Because here it says that it died.
There's 3 daughters. The grandmother, the Safta, and one daughter are missing. Daughter number 2 is alive. Daughter number 3 is dead.
Okay.
She was back, and she had a heart attack when she heard the news, and she died.
Oh.
Okay, so So, but she has a son who's a minor.
Right.
So now we don't know if the Safta is alive or not. But the Safta, unfortunately for the circumstance, was very rich, and she left all these fields. The question is, who's going to go take care of her fields? She's a captive, right? So usually your mored relative, right, a karov, l'nichsei shavoy. The problem here is that if she's in fact dead, then some of her property goes to the daughter who died, which goes to his son, and he's a katan. So you can't send a relative, which is the aunt who's alive, to cover the property of a katan.
What about the husband?
There's no men involved in this story.
Okay, that makes it easier. All right. I
Amar
hear you.
Abaya. So says Abaya, Hechinavid. What are we going to do in this case? And it makes it sound like it was a real case, but it was a case they had in yeshiva just to, get
Yeah.
you through all the issues. So says Abaya, what do we do? Look me l'nichsei biyad da'achta. The Gemara speaks this out very clearly. So follow inside, Rosa. You got Abaya?
I'm just trying to.
Amar Abaya. Hechinavid. What do we do?
Okay.
Look me l'nichsei biyad da'achta. Let's put all of the possessions to watch for the grandmother in the hands of the mature adult daughter who's alive and standing. Well, that's a problem because Dilma Shechiva Safta. Maybe grandma died. And if grandma dies, her property goes to her 3 children, one of whom is dead, but it goes to her son, right? And Amor din Karov Nechse Katan. You can't let the aunt be in charge of Nechasim that belong to the Katan because pretty soon she's going to keep it all for herself. So you can't give it to the aunt. To give it all to the kid, right? That's a big problem because remember, we don't give things to kids because they can ruin everything. Dilma lo shchiva safta. Maybe the grandma didn't die, and therefore it is a nichse shavoy. And the principle was ein moridin katan nichse shavoy. You can't let a child go and watch over property of a shavoy. So what are we going to do? Says Abaya, I got a perfect solution. Amar Abaya, Hilkach, what you should do is split it in half. Palga yehivna la'achta. Give half of it to the sister, right? And again, it might be that it's hers because her mother died. It might be that she's just watching it for her mother while she's captive. When her mother comes back, she'll take it back, right? And pay her like a sharecropper. The idich palga, the other half, you give it to the minor, just in case it's his. Now, of course, he can't take care of it himself. So mukmina le apatrapa lianuka. We assign an apotropos, how do you translate in English? A
Administrator.
Administrator, thank you, for this child. Rava says, well, once you're setting up an administrator for the child, let them just administer the whole thing. Once you set up an apatrapa for half, let that person, that administrator, cover the whole thing. So that was the machloket Abaya and Rav. Lesof, that's why it's a practical story. Shamu d'shchiva safta. They heard that grandma died.
Unfortunately.
Okay. Now they didn't hear what happened to the daughter who's captive. So grandma's dead, but one daughter is known to be dead, right? She died in the city. But there's one living daughter and one missing daughter still. So Amar Abaya, well, look, it's pretty clear what happens here, right? Grandma died and she left this to her 3 children. So at least a third goes to the middle daughter who's alive. At least a third goes to the son, the grandson, right? But the other third we're not so sure about because either that she's a shavoi also, right? And she doesn't have any children, she doesn't have a husband, right? So it'll go to her sisters, right? So tilta yavina le'itita lachta, give a third to the sister who's alive in here. Tilta yavina le'yanuka, give a third to the child, this grandson. The idach tilta, but the other third, split it in half. What's half of a third?
6.
Yavina danka is the word for a sixth. You give a sixth la'achta. The idach danka mukmin le'apatrapa le'yanuka. The other 6th you assign apotropos because it's either possessions that are going to go to him or it's nichsei shavoy. So therefore you should assign that 6th, just like Abai said in the first case. And Rava again says, no, migu demukum apotropo ledanka. Since you assigned an apotropos for a 6th of the property, mukmina nami apotropo idich danka, you should assign an apotropos for the other 6th. So meaning a third goes to the boy, the grandson, a third goes to the surviving daughter. The other third is unknown. And therefore, says Abaya, you give half and half. It says Rava, you make an apotropos for all of it. So that was one case. Okay. Very interesting, practical case of the grandma who was captive. The next case gets a little more complicated. It's not the same case, but it's also very interesting. And the case is, well, a person named Mari Bar Isak. Now, Mari Bar Isak has a bad reputation, as we're going to see in the Gemara. He was not the nicest, most gentle guy. Or as as Rav Chisda calls him, he was alim. Alim means a thug. Okay, so I'll translate it. He was a violent guy.
I think it's gonna be 8.
So Mari Bar Isik was a guy who lived whatever, I forgot what city they lived in, and his father Isik died.
Beit Hozai.
No, we're going to get to Beit Hozai. He didn't live in Beit Hozai. He grew up in Beit Hozai, but he moved
Oh,
somewhere.
he went to Beit Hozai.
Yeah, so he's somewhere else right now. So Mari Bar Isik is in whatever city, where I guess wherever Chisda was. I don't know where that, Pompadita or Surah. Anyways, Mari Bar Isik is there, and his father died. It doesn't matter exactly when for our story. And he's starting to split up. His father was very wealthy, Isaac, and he's splitting up all the possessions. And one day, a young ragged man shows up and says, "Hi, I am the brother of Mari. His father, went to Beit Hozai for he was in a diplomatic post there. He got married there. He had a child. It's me. We'll call him Ralph, right? And I want half the property." So Atalei Acha mi Beit Hozai, his brother came and said from Beit Hozai and said, "I'm your brother." Now we know that Isaac lived in Beit Hozai, so there's smach for this circumstance. Amarle Plogli, and he said to him, "Give me half the property." Our father Isaac, who I never had a chance to spend time with, sadly, left $10 million. Give me half of it. Amarle, so Mari said, "Lo yadanalach," right? I never seen you before in my life. I don't know who you are. So Atzak made Rav Chisda, and Rav Chisda said, "Well, the fact that you don't know who he is no proof that he's not your brother." I'm like, maybe he said the right thing to you. Shenemar, Yosef et achiv v'hem lo hikiru. Remember, Yosef's brothers, 20 years passed, right? And they didn't recognize him. It was less than 20 years, right? So Milamed, Sheyatza b'lo chatimat zakan, b'lo chatimat zakan. He went away without a facial hair, and he came back with facial hair. People change over time. Some people get gray hairs even, believe it or not. And their brothers don't recognize him. So it's true, Murray. We trust you, Murray, that you don't recognize this guy, though it sounds, suspicious that you all of a sudden don't recognize him. But maybe he just looks different. So you can't prove that he's not your brother because you don't recognize him. So Amrle, so Rav Chisda said to this guy, again, we don't have a name for him, we're calling him Ralph, Zil aiti sadi dachbat. Okay, go. Yeah, I mean, it's very nice that you showed up and said you're the brother of this $10 million estate, but you got to prove that, right? I mean, prove that your father was your father was Isaac, sorry, and prove that you're a brother. Amrle, so this guy said, "Look, of course I came prepared. I brought 2 witnesses with me who knew my father, who knew that he was Isaac. But guess what? They got to town and they heard that Murray is a bully, and they're scared to come to court and testify." So Amrle said to him, "Itli Sahadi, I've got 2 witnesses sitting in the hotel. Udachili mine, they are afraid of him, of of Murray, sorry, my wonderful brother. The Gavra Alimahu, he's a violent guy. He's got a bad reputation." And so they're afraid. They're going to testify that I'm his brother. He's going to come bash their heads in. So Amar Leili today, so Rav Chisda turned around to Mari and he said, Mari, I believe them. You have that reputation. Zil ant aitisadi lavachuchu. Go prove he's not your brother. Tosis, what do you mean? How do you prove someone's not your brother? You can't. So Tosis points out what he's saying to him is, look, these witnesses are here. They're terrified to come because of you. You have to go. If they don't come because of you, we're going to basically trust them. You have to bring them to court and say, testify, okay? Because we know that you're a violent guy. Again, you see that this is a special rule because of who Isi was. Murray, I keep saying Isi, because of Murray was. So Amrle, so Murray said to Rav Chisda, "What do you mean? I might be a violent guy, but I know the halacha. Is this really the right thing? I have to prove that he's not my brother. Right? He should prove that he's my brother." Amrle, so Rav Chisda said, no. There's special rules for you kind of people. For you and all your violent friends, this is how the rules are, right? You don't fall in the same rules because you intimidate witnesses. So we know you intimidate witnesses. You have to get these witnesses come here. Amrle, so Murray said back to him, "Okay, I'm not gonna be upset that you call me a violent criminal, but sof, I don't understand what you gain by me bringing these witnesses. If they're terrified of me, when I tell them they have to come, they're going to come and they're still not going to testify, right? Atu sahadi v'lo misadi. They're going to come and they're going to be quiet. They're going to suddenly forgot their names, right? like happens all the time, unfortunately, right? People suddenly forgot everything they told the police, right? Amarle, so he said, Rav Chisda said, well, look, you're a scary guy, but Tarti lo avti, right? I don't think they're going to lie, right? Meaning they're not going to do two. They might not say the affirmative that this guy from Beit Chozai is your brother, but they're not going to lie and say, oh, he's not your brother. So the Sof, in fact, Atu Sadi, and they said the Achmu. In fact, the witnesses came and they said this guy from Beit Chozai is the brother of Murray. Okay, so Murray's got to give you half the inheritance. Turns out that while this case was going on, this brother made a few inquiries around town, and it turned out that not only did Murray control the fields that his father left, but he had invested in those fields and he had improved them. So Amar Le, so this brother, this newfound brother, said, "Liflugli nami mi pardisi ubustanai deshata." I want some of the improved land. You invested in vineyards, you invested in grapevines. I should get half of that. Amar Le, right? So Rav Chisda said, yeah, it's a good point. Shaper Kamar Lecha. Ditznam, because we have a Mishnah we're going to have in Bava Batra, which says the following: Haniach banim gdolim uktanim. Let's say a man dies and he leaves a field and he leaves children. Some are ktanim who can't sell it because they're minors. Some are gedolim. V'yishbichu gedolim et hanechasim, and the gedolim invest and they improve the property of the land. They don't get to keep everything they invested. It goes to the middle, meaning all of the children equally share in the investment. So says this son from Beit Chozai, my brother, I was presumably a minor when this happened. My brother Murray invested in the fields. He put $1 million in the fields. I want half of that too. Says the Gemara, and Rabba agreed with the halacha shpichul emtza. I'm like Abaya, said Abaya, slow down. Now you're sort of reaching a little too far. Me dummy. There, when the father died, you knew that there were children who were gedolim and ketanim, and the gedolim made a choice to invest in the field, right? Hatam gedolim gabi ketanim yadi. They knew that there were children who were minors. The kamachli, and by investing, they were mochel. They said, we are going to invest in our father's fields and give it to everybody. But hacha mi yada delechal, right? Everybody agrees that Murray had no idea about this brother. So when he invested, he didn't know that there was another brother. So he would have never done it if there was a brother. You know, the story, this was a great story. Everyone was talking about it. It was in all the newspapers. And it came in front of Reb Ami. Amra Lahu, Reb Ami said, Gedola mizu Amru. You know, he had a better claim because we said Shamin Lenka Aris, right? Remember, we said that if you're a Karov that goes down to a Nechsei Shavoy, you get paid like an Aris. Not only do you get your investment back, you get money from the property that increased, right? If you make the fruits, you get to keep that. Shouldn't we give him the investment he made? So you won't take that away from Murray. But ahadruaha likamei de Rav Chisda. You know, the story got back to Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda said, slow down. Amalei midami. By Morid Karov the Nechsei Shavoi, right? We said we treat you like an Aris. But Hatam Birashut Nachid. There you went down with permission of Beit Din. That was the rule. Hacha, here, Murray was totally inappropriate. His father died. He didn't make any effort to find any relatives. He didn't go back to Beit Chozai, where his father lived for 20 years, and say, are there any descendants of my father in Beit Chozai? He just went in and took the field. Violent guy. Here, he didn't go down with permission. And furthermore, Od Katanu, right? Remember that the brother in Beit Chozai,
minor.
And Ein Murray didn't corrupt the say Katan. You would have never let Murray go down and invest in the field if we knew that there was a Katan there. So Adrua Kamed Rab Ami, that word got back to Rab Ami, and he said, you're right. I didn't know the details. No one told me these facts. I'm a little low. Saimu Kamed the Katan Avi. No one told me that this one was a Katan. And so therefore I didn't have all the facts straight. And it turns out that Murray should have never invested in the field without finding out who, in fact, inherited with him. And it's his own problem. And he's got to give 50% to his newfound brother, and I'm sure they're going to have a great relationship after that. Shavua Tov, Miriam, I'll post another thing, but next week, Motzei Shabbat I can do on Zoom.
Yeah.
And probably Sunday morning. I don't know if you're still.
I'm done with classes for the next 3 weeks.
So we'll plan for Sunday morning next week. We're going to be away. We just have to make sure we have good Wi-Fi, but we hopefully will, Rose and I.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Okay, Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.